Hey guys, it's me, Mr. 250, and welcome back to Banshee's Last Cry. The last thing that we did was, we accused Mr. Jones of never being killed and never being dismembered, which, on the surface seems a little odd. However, it likely means that Mr. Jones is in fact among us. This time, the look of shock on Faber's face was obvious. He was badly rocked by my words. Everyone else in the room was just as stunned. I don't know what you've been smoking, bro, but my name is Jonas Faberge. I got ID if you want to see it. That beard's fake, isn't it? It looks like it's not quite on straight. Surprised, his hand flew straight to his jaw before he could catch himself. He dropped his hand and grinned sheepishly. I can't believe I fell for such a goofy trick. Actually, probably had more anger. You meddling kids. I wasn't sure it would work myself. I grinned back at him. He's Mr. Jones? Mr. Forrest shouted. So who does that body belong to? I don't know who it is, but it's definitely not Mr. Jones. The real Mr. Jones, in other words, Faberge, murdered and dismembered whoever that was. And it was done while he was fully dressed. There was fabric from the suit stuck to him, but weirdly, his sunglasses were lying right next to him. You'd think they would have fallen off when he was being cut up. It had to be that the killer placed them there on purpose. You're saying he put them there to make us think it was Mr. Jones? I'm sure of it. After all, none of us knew what Mr. Jones really looked like. If it hadn't been for the suit and the sunglasses, we might have figured it out earlier. But how did the guy that was killed get in here? When was he killed? You just told us earlier that no one could have snuck in without leaving tracks. Grace helped me out by asking all the right questions. Right. But I said no one snuck in. I said no one snuck in. I never said no one was snuck in. The victim covertly entered inside Mr. Jones's suitcase. His bag was empty when we searched it, not because its contents were stolen. It was because that's where the cut-up body was. The real reason the body was cut up in the first place was to make it easier to carry. I made sure to speak calmly and objectively, but inside I was shivering with horror. And that's the important thing, is that a while ago we said, why was the body cut up? Now I said, disguise the identity, but because the HUD was still there, which I didn't know, that wouldn't have worked. And then the other option was out of spite. Well, I guess it's a possibility. I mean, if you have, a seriously deranged killer whose only killing purpose is to kill for no other reason, that is a possibility, but not in this case. This case, it was to transport the body because I don't know if you've ever attempted to stuff one of your friends into a bag before. Not saying I have, but whenever I haven't done it, because I haven't, it's very difficult to do because the human body isn't really made for compacting. You kind of got to make it do that. Cutting it up is a really good way to do that. Not, saying from experience. I may have stuffed my friend in the bag, but I promise you I didn't cut them up. Okay, let's keep going. After dinner, Mr. Jones went back to his room. He placed the body parts in a pile by the window. Then, after setting up some kind of device, he left through the same window. He went to a car he had hidden nearby. Then he drove out for a little bit. Before coming back, he called the front desk in order to make it look like he was at the station. Everyone looked at Faberge. They no longer doubted the truth of what I said. Wait, Grace said, some kind of device on the window? Like what? Something to make the window break on its own. Break on its own? Is that even possible? I think so. I'm not exactly sure how it was done, but maybe it was done something like this. Oh boy. You guys ready to learn? This is how we're actually going to learn how the window was broken. We theorized on, maybe it was a smaller piece of glass that was broken elsewhere, or maybe it was played back on louder or something. We didn't really understand how it could have been done remotely. And I mean, there's probably a couple ways, but this is probably the best answer for it. I slowly explained the idea that had just flashed in my mind. Let's say the killer leaves through one side of a double window that opens out. Then he closes the other side tightly so it can't be blown open by the wind. Next, he attaches a rope, maybe about 5 or so feet long, to the handle. On the other end, he takes something flat, maybe like the hard bottom of a ski bag, for example. He ties it to the end of the rope. He connects the window to a board with a rope, Grace asked. And then what? Before he jumps down, he shoves the board into the snow on the roof so that it's stuck there. By doing that, he knows that at some point it will come crashing down when the snow slides off the roof. The window gets pulled suddenly and wham! It bangs against the outside wall and shatters. Then, the board and the rope get buried in the snow, and no evidence is left behind. And, there would be evidence left behind, but there would be no evidence left behind that the police could find, because you're hoping by the end of all of this that you've murdered everybody. You clean up all of the evidence pointing to you, and you get the heck out of there before the police come. I figure Faberge estimated that would happen around midnight. That's why he wrote that note and left it in the girl's room. But he still had enough time to make an alibi, so there was no problem even if the timing went awry. So, why did he pretend that he was attacked? I think he did that because he didn't want anyone investigating the area under the window too closely. It was also a chance to cast more suspicion on Bobby, who was already the only person not accounted for when the glass broke. Mr. Forrest directed an unforgiving stare at Faberge. I can see what a sly little snake he is now. But why did he have to do all that? Why bring a dead body in at all? And why here? It sounded almost as if he wished Faberge had done his slaughter somewhere else. Well, maybe we should direct that question to the man himself. I looked over at Faberge. Everyone on the couch stood up and moved fearfully away from him. Faberge's laugh was embarrassed as he ripped the beard off his face. Without the beard, the mountain man impression disappeared completely, and his distinctive features were his cold, merciless eyes. Whew, that was itchy. It's a relief to finally take it off. Mind if I go shave real quick? Before I could react, Bobby threw himself at Faberge with lightning speed. Was it you? Did you kill him? Answer me! Bobby wrapped his hands around the neck of the still-seated Faberge and began to choke him with all his strength. Just when I thought I should intervene, Faberge suddenly reversed their positions. In the blink of an eye, Faberge had Bobby pinned to the sofa, his arm shoved up painfully behind his back. Arrgh! Just turned pirate there. Bobby let out a scream of pain. No one moves, or I'll snap his arm like a twig. Everyone was still. Mr. Forrest struggled to control his rage. You! It was really you? Still holding Bobby down, Faberge looked at him and nodded. Of course. You see, I first checked in as John Jones. A fake name, naturally. When I signed the registry, I faked his signature so that the police wouldn't suspect that he had never checked in himself. Let go! Bobby struggled as he shouted. With a sudden twist, Faberge shoved him hard in my direction. Bobby came flying off balance and landed on top of me. Grace offered her hand to help him up, but he just turned and glared at Faberge with a look of pure unbridled hatred. Were you and Abby in love? I'm sorry I was forced to kill her. Really, I've killed lots of people, and every time I did, it was because there was no other choice. He spoke with a lack of emotion that sent shivers down my spine. This man is a true professional, I thought. A professional killer. As if he read my mind, Faberge pulled out an automatic pistol from somewhere and pointed it at us. So, why? Why did you have to kill Abby? I could feel my mouth drying up with fear even as I spoke. She had it figured all out. Unlike you, it wasn't all this logical reasoning. More like women's intuition, I think. When I heard she was going to check out the room with the body again, I knew the jig was up. I waited until she was alone, then ran into her in the hallway. She was spunky, I say that much. She came right out and said, "You're Mr. Jones, aren't you?" It took me off guard, but I did a quick believe me. Abby didn't have time to suffer, which... When me and Winton investigated the room with Faberge, we had a very similar thing where Faberge ended both Grace and ourselves. How dare you even say her name? I was thinking It was exactly what I was thinking too. This guy didn't feel a shred of guilt for what he'd done. For him, killing someone was like removing a tree branch from the road. "But why?" Mr. Forrest asked, almost pleadingly. "Why did you do it? Why here?" "I only chose this place for its location. It's a tiny little inn far off the beaten path. I figured no one here would know either of our faces." "That body. Who is it anyway? Why did you kill him?" He seemed to be willing to answer everyone's questions, so I threw in one of my own. "Him? Oh, he was a buddy of mine. But this was the first and last time we ever pulled a job together." "A job?" "Yeah, a bank heist. That first guess of yours was right. You'd be surprised how many first guesses are. Anyway, I planned the thing from start to finish. But he's the one that actually carried it out. Larry Carboni was his name." Everyone looked shocked. I was too. My shot-in-the-dark theory had been dead on. When you guys first started talking about it, I was thinking, what am I gonna do? But I just kept telling myself there was nothing directly connecting me with it, so I'd be okay. "Why did you kill him?" "Well, at first, we agreed to split it 70-30. But it was more money than I expected, and he started demanding 50-50. After that, I knew I couldn't trust him, so I decided to whack him." "But you didn't have to do all this." "You could be right. But anyway, we put all the cash in a box and sent it here by private courier, making sure it would pass inspection on the way. So we had to come here to get it. It's due to arrive tomorrow." "He sent the money here." I was pretty impressed. It's tough to make corpses disappear, and I was on the run from the cops. I didn't have time for anything fancy. I decided it would be smarter not to do a crappy job of disposing the body. Faberge continued speaking, almost as if he wanted to boast. "He had a prior, but I didn't. If the cops had ID'd his body, they'd guess he was killed by his accomplices, right? So I left tracks to make it look like the killer ran out the window. I'd figured they'd search the area, but I didn't think they'd suspect the other guest at the inn. Besides, I had a perfect alibi. There was no way anyone could figure it out. At least, that's what I thought. You dang meddling kids, I'll shake my fist at you." Suddenly, he dropped his arrogant tone and looked down for a moment. "But somehow Abby did. So you killed her. That's what brought down the whole house of cards," I said reproachfully. "Yeah, I still don't understand what it was about me that set her alarm." He shook his head in disbelief. "I think Abby's suspicion started after he was attacked. I barely knew Bobby and Mr. Forrest, but she had been close to them, so she wouldn't have believed that either one of them would have done it. And she knew enough about being outside in the cold that she didn't think a killer could be wandering out there. That made her think that Faberge's story about being attacked was fake. But then, why would he say that he was? It was that chain of thinking that led her to eventually figure the whole thing out. And it also led to a brutal murder. You may not believe it, but this is the first time I ever killed someone outside of the underworld. I know it was wrong. Incredibly, I actually did believe him. So, what are you gonna do with us? I came straight out and asked the question we were all thinking. Relax, I'm not into mass murder. He's only into mass murder if it's the way to keep himself from going to jail, I suppose. I'll think of something else. Something else? Like what? Nothing special. I'm just going to wait for the money to arrive, then go on the lam. Naturally, I'm gonna have to tie you guys up in the meantime. Otherwise, I won't be able to get much sleep. And I do need my beauty sleep. With this storm, I don't know if I'd be expecting that package tomorrow. It looked like he hadn't considered that because he seemed shaken for a moment. But it didn't take him long to recover. If it doesn't come tomorrow, I'll just wait till it does. Might be a bit uncomfortable for you all, but oh well. Then he turned to everyone and raised his voice. Alright, confession time's over. Mr. Innkeeper, I assume you have some rope somewhere. I'd appreciate if you could fetch it for me. Any kind works. Go get it yourself, Mr. Forrest spit out between clenched teeth. I'm not asking you again. Do it or someone gets hurt. He waved his gun lightly to emphasize his point. If you want to shoot, then shoot. Mr. Forrest leaned against the wall with his arms folded. So, you want to cause trouble, huh? Fobbers leveled his gun in a sidearm pose and pointed it at Mr. Forrest. Hey, what are you doing? I didn't say who was gonna go first. Bobby muttered to himself. No one appeared to have heard him. Okay, I'll do it. Just put down the gun. I'll get the rope. Flustered and upset, Mr. Forrest hurried out of the room. Okay then, now listen up the rest of you. If even one of you resists, the entire group pays for it. One of you dies, and I get to decide who. So, if you don't want that to happen, I suggest you keep a close eye on your neighbors and make sure they don't try anything funny. Fobbers had completely shed his old gentle facade. What stood in front of us now was a hardened killer on the run. But it's possible this was a new performance. A way to control all of us through fear. Maybe he really did have no intention of committing mass murder. But even so, I didn't have the courage to test him. If I even tried something, I'd be responsible for the death of someone else. It might even be Grace. Just the thought of that left me paralyzed with fear. Just then, Mr. Forrest came back slowly into the room, carrying what looked like several lengths of laundry cord. Is this okay? That won't be enough, but oh well. Start by tying up the men. Use the end of the ropes and tie them together with their arms up behind their backs. I'll come and check the knots when you're done, and if they aren't tight enough for me, I'll shoot your wife in the knee. Got it? Obediently, Mr. Forrest tied Bobby and my arms together up behind our backs. The ropes were so tight that they cut into my wrists. Even a small amount of movement made me wince in pain. I glanced at his face and saw that he was gritting his teeth, his eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, he said miserably. But there was nothing to forgive. I knew how much this was hurting him. Next came Chase and Amber Buchanan. Then Colleen, and after that, Tiffany, Molly, and Debbie were tied together. There was just one rope left. Grace and Mr. Forrest were the only ones not yet restrained. Perfect. First, tie one end around her arms. Wait, hold it. Even better, you tie him up. Fobbers decided it would probably be safer to have her be the last unbound victim. Grace bit her lips nervously. Hey, hurry up, Fobbers pointed a gun at Grace. With no other choice, she stood up and approached Mr. Forrest. He handed her the last rope with a resigned look on his face. Hey, we gotta do something, Bobby whispered close to my ear. Do something? If we don't, we're all gonna be killed. But he said he wouldn't. You're gonna believe him? You think he's gonna leave us alive after we've all seen his face? Putting it that way, I had to admit he had a point. If he was planning on killing us all, he certainly wasn't going to come right out and admit it. We would have all fought desperately for our lives if we knew that we were going to die. So he lied to get us tied up first. What should I do? Once we are all tied up and can't move, it'll be too late. But then again, what if he isn't planning on killing anyone unless they resist? If we fight back and fail, we could make the whole situation worse. Bobby whispered to me urgently, Hey, there's a pocket knife in my pants pocket. Grab it and cut the ropes. Bobby was still half out of his mind with rage. Should I really listen to what he was saying? It was taking time for Grace to tie Mr. Forrest's hands. I had to make a decision. Quickly, I felt inside Bobby's pocket. Fobbers had his eyes fixed on Grace as she worked. No, not there, the left pocket. My fingers touched something metal. That's it. Carefully, I grabbed it with my fingers and slowly pulled it out. It fell on the sofa with a quiet plop. It looked to be a small folding knife. I'll do it, Bobby said, reaching down for his knife. With his hands behind his back, he dexterously unfolded the blade. Placing it against the rope around my hands, he began sawing it back and forth. Grace finished binding Mr. Forrest's hands behind him. All right, out of the way. Fobbers ordered Grace aside and went to examine the knot. The rope still wasn't cut all the way through. This is too loose. Move back. Faberge waved the gun at Grace and motioned for her to step back. Grace moved away further, and Faberge began to retie Mr. Forrest's hands. His gun was stuck in his waistband. Just then, the rope snapped. "See? This is how you do it," Faberge said, satisfied with his work. Dang it! Did I have time to cut Bobby's rope? Just as I was frantically weighing my options. I saw Grace standing behind Faberge, slowly raising a mop handle over her head. I nearly shouted out loud at her. I frantically shook the rope off my hands. My plan was to hit Faberge with a head-on tackle. I leaped at the exact instant that he pulled the gun out of his waistband. The only thing that saved Grace and me was that, for a moment, he couldn't decide which target to fire at. Ignoring Grace, he turned the gun towards me. But it was at that precise moment that I hit him, harder than anything that I have ever hit in my life. The impact sent us both rolling onto the ground. The gun flew from his hand and landed near Grace's feet with a dull clinking sound. "Grace, grab the gun!" I heard Forrest call out to Grace as Faberge and I rolled on the ground, both of us vying for position. Somehow, I managed to wind up on top, and I wrapped my hands around his thick, muscular neck. I put all my weight into it and squeezed. But between the thickness of the rope and the fact that my hands were still numb from being tied up, it didn't seem to be working. Just then, he brought his knee up in between my legs, hard enough to lift me in the air. Screaming, I grabbed my crotch and doubled over. I was in far too much agony to even stand. In an instant, my body was soaked in sweat. Oh, I blew it. Hand that over. I heard Faberge's voice and looked up. Grace was holding the gun in both hands and pointing at him. "Don't move. One step and I'll shoot." Her quivering voice bellied her tough words, and because her hands were shaking, I doubted she could shoot straight. "Give it up. You're not going to shoot. I promise I won't kill you, so just hand it over." Faberge walked confidently towards her. With the gun still pointed, she squeezed her eyes shut. "Open your eyes, Grace," I said as I shut my own in fear. An instant later, there was an ear-splitting bang, and then silence. It was so complete that I had a horrible feeling that I'd find that everyone had disappeared. Cringing with fear, I slowly opened my eyes. The scene in front of me hadn't really changed. The only differences were that Grace was sprawled backwards on the ground, and Faberge appeared to be tilting his head to the side. That, and Bobby was standing behind Faberge. The strange thing was that his hands were still bound, but they were somehow in front of him and holding a mop handle. As I watched, Faberge slowly slumped to one side and collapsed on the ground. Did Grace shoot him? "I hit him?" Grace murmured in disbelief. "No, your bullet went over there." Bobby pointed at the ceiling with his two bound hands. "So, what happened to him?" Bobby grinned and held up the mop handle. I knew all that time I spent holding a mop would come in handy. "Bobby, your hands. How did you do that?" The rope wasn't cut, and the knots looked as tight as before. I've always been this flexible. Watch this." He held his hands down, brought his legs up through the space between his body, and moved his hands back behind him. It was like some kind of magician's trick. "Max, are you okay?" Grace dropped the gun and ran to me. The moment she asked, the pain returned in a flood. "Ugh, not really." "Are you wounded? Where?" "Well, I'm not sure wounded is the right word." Finally, she looked down and noticed where I was holding my hands. "Oh!" Flustered, Grace averted her eyes and spun away. A second later, she turned back with a worried look. "Does it really hurt that bad?" "Yeah, so much I wish I'd been born a woman." Despite the pain, I was feeling relieved enough to make a joke. Bobby used his pocket knife to cut Mr. Forrest free. "Okay, what do we do with this guy?" Rubbing his hands to get his circulation back, Mr. Forrest approached Faberge. "I'd like to kill him, but for the time being, let's tie him up," Bobby said. He was surprisingly level-headed now. Faberge lay there limply as we tied him up with a rope. It didn't look like he was going to wake up anytime soon. Grace proceeded to untie the others. If only Abby had made it out of this alive. If she had, maybe one day we'd be able to look back on this frightening day and laugh. But no, I knew I'd never be able to forget her staring eyes, the bashed-in skull. Bobby picked up the gun Grace dropped, and then walked back and looked at Faberge. I could see a fierce internal struggle going on inside of him as a whole range of emotions played across his face. I want to kill him. Should I kill him? I'm sure that it must have been what he was struggling with. I suddenly remembered something important. When the snow stops, almost $2 million is being delivered here. $2 million. 2 people had died because of that money already. Some people wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone to get their hands on that kind of money. Bobby, suddenly seeming to sense my gaze, turned towards me. For a few moments, we stared at each other. There was an almost palpable sense of tension in the air, like a buildup of electricity before lightning strikes. Finally, with a sad smile, he raised up the gun. With his right hand, he manipulated something on it. There was a clicking noise and the gun magazine slid out into his left. He tossed it to me. Nervously, I managed to catch it after a few awkward fumbles. This thing's dangerous. Keep that in a safe place. Yeah, but I'm going to where she is. With slow, heavy steps, he walked out of the lounge. He must be going to see Abby, I recalled. Her body was still in her room. I didn't realize that, Tana. Did they just enter the same text twice? Yeah, they did. They repeated the sentence. Very deja vu. Suddenly, my mind dredged up something I had learned somewhere about automatic pistols. Grace had fired a shot earlier that went into the ceiling. That meant that a bullet should have been automatically loaded from the magazine into the chamber. Unless the bullet was fired or ejected by pulling back the slide, it should still be in the chamber. If Bobby knew enough about guns to eject the magazine with one hand, then he should know that too. I'm going to where she is. Remembering his words, my heart suddenly froze. Just then, there was a muffled sound, like a car backfiring from somewhere in the inn. Why? Why did you do it, Bobby? I sank slowly to the ground with that question reverberating over and over in my head. The person who murdered her is still alive. Why is it fair that you die and not him? No one seemed to understand the significance of what they just heard. They just looked curiously in the direction of the sound. Was that a gun just now? I dropped my head and nodded. But you have all the bullets, right? I didn't have the energy to explain right away. All I could do was wish that this horrible nightmare would end. So, Bobby's suicide is what we got. Yeah, it's a little weird, I have to say, that ending. I don't know, maybe, like, because here's the thing. Only maybe, like, a minute or two before that, Bobby was, showing us how he could do that cool trick with the mop and everything, and how flexible he was. And then he kind of did that. Now, maybe it was because Bobby, once he'd gotten over the high of getting rid of the killer and realized that the killer was alive, but Abby was dead, he just kind of sunk into depression, maybe. I don't know. But either way, Bobby did kill himself. So in this story, we have Mr. Jones quote, but we're not going to count him because he's not one of our people, because now we know Mr. Jones was actually another person entirely. We have Abby and Bobby dead. So we got congratulations, you stopped the killer and solved the crime. So we know how the crime was done in that type of stuff. We've now earned additional choices in the story, which we'll be investigating after we finish up the main route. Now, while we did solve the crime, surely there are better ways to do it than the way we did it. Maybe without losing Abby. And that's what we're going to do next episode. Now, I'm actually going to be busy the next couple of days, but today I actually have off. So I'm going to go and make another episode right after this. That'll come out the next day that I put these out. So we will get started with that next time. Thanks for watching.